Right, so I'm going to be talking today about the inherent connection between the mad scientist trope and masculine transgender identity. I'm speaking solely and mostly from my own experience as a non-binary trans-masculine person, and I'm just really excited to babble about mad science. Right, a little overview of what we're talking about. Here's a mad scientist from Getty Images of all places. So we're going to be having a little chat about the trope of mad science, the existence of it as a popular science fiction concept. We're going to be talking about identity and projection of identity, and we're going to be talking about a little bit about my own experience as a transmasculine person. And yeah, let's go. So what is a mad scientist, you may ask? A mad scientist, I would argue, could be summed up in three terms: a rogue, a skeptic, and a challenger. In Jack Halberstam's book, In a Queer Time and Place, he mentions that transgender depiction on screen is framed in revulsion, sympathy, or empathy. These negative tropes can be understood as villainous, as a way to frame trans identity in shameful terms. And I began to find an interest in locating examples of strength in cisgender characters and therefore understanding them as trans. So you'll often see a lot of mad scientists to be anti-heroes. Take a character like Harley Quinn. A quick rudimentary Google told me that Walter White's a mad scientist, which I think is a hilarious concept. I think he's just a meth dealer. But those are examples of anti-heroes, which is the main place you will see this trope enacted. And to be a mad scientist is to challenge the notion of identity and humanity, much like a trans person may do with their own everyday existence. So to tackle the quote-unquote laws of human nature as is presented by regular modern society, we both do that, shaking hands. All right, so what makes a trope trans? Here are things that I've picked up on in the trope that might make the trope of mad science trans trope. So there is very little connection to gender in the concept of a mad scientist. They're usually just a vessel for science. They aren't a man, they aren't a woman. They're just there to either be a plot device, to push the story along, or to cause havoc. The need for progress and change is also one of the main factors of a trans scientist's, a mad scientist's role in any kind of science fiction film. So, for example, a good example of this, well, I'll get onto that actually. I'll leave that for later. But I'll chat a little bit about these other two concepts I've got on the screen. So the dysphoria of genius. So there is often the big sort of pushback against the mad scientist character, the denial from other outside influences around them that their vision is correct. So yeah, you'll I'll talk about Pacific Rim very quickly, and I'll go back into it fully later. But the character of Newt in Pacific Rim, he spends the first half of the movie doubling down on his own scientific theories and being pushed back against them, regardless of his smarts or his genius. The dysphoria of understanding who you are and the dysphoria of understanding that you are a genius and being put into a space where no one bloody believes you is a crucial part of the mad scientist experience, and therefore, and also the trans experience. And lastly, I have transformation, which is probably the most classic form of mad science you'll see. For example, take the character of Seth Brundle in The Fly, who is a character that goes through bodily transformation. Again, I'm going to touch on that later, but these are all things in my brain and in my mind that create transness in these roles. Yes, okay. So I also wrote down that in a world that may not particularly understand, a genius may feel like an outsider. Many of these tropes really lend well to outsider culture, which often us trans folk can be a part of, either inherently or purposefully. And this is also the same for a mad scientist. They're often going against the grain of what actual acceptable science is in order to push forward their agenda and their feelings and their truth. So my case study, I don't know if you can tell by my outfit, it was on purpose. I'm not just dressed like a Mormon missionary. So what makes Newt Geisler trans? Newt Geisler is a character from 2012 Pacific Rim, directed by Guillermo del Toro. He is portrayed by Charlie Day, a famously short man with a squeaky voice. Good thing to note, much like many of us trans masks. So Newt Geisler is a 6-time PhD awardee. He is a part of the Kaiju Science Department in Pacific Rim. There is a massive force of evil alien monsters coming to kill humanity. And the Pan Pacific Defense Corps, which Newt is a part of, is the main focus in beating out these giant monsters. Newt is one of 2 scientists on hire. The other is Dr. Herman Gottlieb, portrayed by Bern Gorman, who is also trans, but I'm not going to talk about it because he's not a mad scientist. He's just a scientist. So Newt is trans for many reasons. A lot of them are abstract. Newt is not a transgender character in the text, but he is a transgender character to many, many fans and many people who have seen the film. He's got that T-boy swag, as you might say. So he's easy to identify with for a trans masc person, as mentioned, because of his shorter stature, his squeaky voice, not things to be considered inherently mad science related. But if you want to go into it, most mad scientists are often short and squeaky and not necessarily understood as big, rough, masculine men. So here's a determination. He's got a massive, intense passion and a vision, much like we may have with creating our bodies for our own excitement, pleasure, and contentment. Obviously, his goals are to stop humanity from dying at the hands of giant monsters, but you know, same goals, different times. So if you boil it down to his journey in the film, which is starts off as a rogue scientist, is mostly denied for his genius and is ignored for his eccentricities, goes against the grain, makes inherent and intense change, and therefore is lauded as a hero. You might be saying, Newt, oh dear Newt, why is this trans? A lot of this is because I say it is. And I also feel very intensely, I don't know. Something that I wrote about when I wrote an essay about Newt Geisler a couple years ago for Episodes, which is a newsletter written by the excellent American TV critic Emily King. I believe she used to go by Emily Vanderwerf. I wrote an essay about how this character is very important to me as a trans person. And something that I really liked that I wrote was, and I'm quoting directly, I want to be that fucking committed to something. I spent years barely committing to the pronouns I used. Maybe that's why I want to be a mad, lonely, spiteful scientist. For the belief of it all, for the thrill. There is an inherent masculinity in the presentation of this character because he is foolhardy. He rushes into things. He is not elegant. He is ungraceful. These are you may see them as negative masculine tropes, but they're always tropes that I identified with regardless of my gender or understanding of being. And to see someone portray them in this lens was its own sort of wake up and alarm call. His behavior is masculine rather than what you would understand a quote unquote female scientist to do. And that's all I'll say there. This is the best slides I've ever made. How'd that get in? Oh no, how did that get in there? Oh, anyway. Some other examples of mad science. I have a few here. Obviously, the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Frankenfurter is a mad scientist. Frankenfurter is creating a man. How is that not something to be said about transgender cultivation and the cultivation of man? So yeah, watch Rocky Horror again and think about this gender fuckery person projecting her own fears of masculinity and her own want of masculinity in a boy, in a blonde boy in gold shorts, and think, Newt was right. The T-boy swag of Safe Brundle. I was very tired when I wrote this, can you tell? In the David Cronenberg classic The Fly, when the character of Seth Brundle accidentally manages to merge himself with a fly and therefore begins the transformation of man to fly, he experiences a lot of what you would argue to be just regular masculine puberty symptoms, but also what a trans man might push forward, a trans man might experience whilst on testosterone. So excessive hair growth, a higher sex drive, anger, and lots of other juicy things. And yeah, any motherfucker who tried to bring someone back to life via the act of surgical science. 1985's Reanimator is a great example of this. And you could also argue that just by that image alone, you can see that is what I was describing earlier, a man of short, nerdy stature who doesn't exactly fit into inherent and media masculinity. I bring up these examples for a few reasons, but the biggest one is that there is a level of understanding that a queer person may have about films like this that maybe a cis person won't. And yeah. So theory and practice. Oh, here's my guy again. So a lot of my story is that of using fiction to understand myself and move into my true identity. So when I watched Pacific Rim for the first time and watched it for a second time and watched it for the sixth time and the ninth, I started to wonder why I was so intensely fixated on a man and why I felt as if he understood me more than anyone else I'd ever met, in spite of the fact that he has 40 minutes of screen time in both movies of the franchise overall. And it was because a lot of the traits that I have as just a person, not a boy, not a girl, not even a non-binary person, but as a person, could be seen in someone who is inherently masculine. And I wanted to be understood in that immediate sense. Fiction as teacher is to say that if you are finding out your identity via any kind of media, there is a level of teaching that comes from that, and therefore the gender discovery of this. And finally, when I came out as a man to my mum a couple of months ago, that was my transformation. That was my Brundlefly. That was my the erection of Frankenstein's monster. There is also a lot to be said about the language I'm using and the the coding of villains and evil um, tropes. Well, in the trans community, trans men are often villainized. Think of and I'm using an example that I don't know very much about, but I understand that a character in the L Word, when they went on testosterone, their character flipped from being quite patient, quite nice, to being aggressive, to being masculine. Trans men are inherently bad because they have testosterone in them. We find ourselves in these characters of villainy because the world is often interested in framing us as such. So it gets to a point where you think, well, haven't I been doing that the whole time? And can't I do that? Yeah. So the conclusion is that obviously tropes are made for us to identify with. Every trope in cinema, in film, is built for your recognition, is built for you to go, ah, that's me. And fiction can aid discovery. Fiction can be something of, as mentioned, a teacher. And mad science is for outside culture. Mad scientists are the real movers and shakers within most of the properties you'll see. And so are trans people. I've been really stoked to talk to you about this today, and I feel like this is quite a short talk, so I'm gonna open up the floor to any questions and to